Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Vanessa, and I am here today at Recla Learning Studios with you, improving and growing in our educational understandings. So today we are going to continue our conversation about lesson planning. We've been talking about that a couple of times over the last month, and so today I wanted to touch base again on lesson planning and help you, guide you a little bit more on what it means to plan the Finnish way. So don't forget to like and follow and subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Courage to Teach Differently, so that you can receive all the notifications for our videos as we continue to grow in our business and challenge teachers globally. Okay, so what if planning didn't have to be so tedious, right? What if we didn't have to write down every single detail, plan every moment, sort out every resource, but came to class with just the outline of what we wanted our students to learn? I know that sounds a little bit scary, but it provides agency and autonomy for both you and your students. So let's explore this quieter, more responsive way forward. The reality is that lesson planning often feels overwhelming, right? I know that when I've worked in schools and I've asked teachers to do lesson plans, I get big sighs. I get some of the teachers turning in the work and others, finding other alternative ways to plan their lessons instead of through actual lesson planning. Not because teachers lack skills or because they're just not good teachers, but because traditional systems demand something really nearly impossible, because you cannot predict perfectly how your students are going to respond to a lesson or where they're going to be struggling, right? So we cannot honestly create learning outcomes, lesson plans with learning outcomes and expect our students to achieve that without being flexible. So most planning approaches expect teachers to be exhaustive, controlled, and predictive in ways that don't reflect the beautiful unpredictability of real classrooms, right? How many teachers can probably tell me that their classroom never, right, or almost never turns out the way they planned it? And that's just the reality of how class is. So why should we as administrators expect teachers to create these impossible plans? Questions like, did this actually land with my students, right? You're just not sure if what you planned actually worked. What should I do tomorrow based on today? Sometimes we want to move forward with our lesson plan, but the kids didn't get it. So what are you going to do now? And why does planning take so much time? But we still aren't quite sure that our students are getting it, and we're biting our nails during exam time to find out if our kids really learned it. So let's create a different starting point, right? Finnish lesson planning doesn't begin with a typical checklist of activities, worksheets, scripts, or minute-by-minute pacing guides that consume so much teacher time and energy. Instead, it starts with something much quieter and more powerful, a fundamental shift in perspective that changes everything that follows, right? So we're needing to look through a different lens. This is what I'm asking. And that lens needs to be focused on the student's thinking. So the question we can ask ourselves is, what thinking do we want to notice, observe today? Right? We have our content, we have our textbook, we know the content, the information. But I am sure that no matter what teacher I talk to, they would tell me there's too much content. There's too much in the textbook to cover all of that in the time frame that we're given as teachers in the class for the school year. So what we need to do is look at that content, look at the information that the students need to learn about, and find out what kind of thinking about that content do we want to notice. This simple question reorients the entire planning process around observation, curiosity, student agency, and authentic learning rather than compliance and coverage. So, several priorities I want to share with you when lesson planning. Number one, plan for thinking, right? We want to create space for students to explain their thinking, student reasoning, right? Making their thinking visible. This is something I've been talking about for the last couple of sessions. Second, meaning making, meaning we're designing lessons where students construct knowledge rather than passively receiving it. We're not asking them to absorb a bunch of information. We're asking them to explore and find meaning, what matters to them. And third, we want to have dialogue. We want to have conversation. We want to have circle integration. We want to have feedback and reflection from the students, building opportunities for students to talk with the teacher and with each other, and self-talk, right? Writing down questions, thoughts. So self-reflection, challenges, and refining their ideas together. Finnish-inspired planning centers lessons around the questions students want to explore, the ideas they test, and the conversations they have with each other. So this is not something that teachers can predict. We cannot write this on a lesson plan, turn it into the administration, and know exactly how it's going to go, because students have their own ideas and their own interests. So this needs to be flexible. Tasks become support for thinking. In other words, our station learning that we have in the classroom needs to support the thinking. So today, we're going to have 3 or 4 stations related to this content that we find in the textbook. Then, as we observe and reflect throughout the day, we will realize, okay, so the students are really struggling in this area, or the students are really curious in this area. So tomorrow I want to adjust my stations to support the direction that they want to go. So the tasks are not the end goal themselves, but the process on the way to the thinking, right? This fundamentally shifts what gets written in a lesson plan and how teachers think about their role in the learning process. All right, that was priority 1. Priority 2, fewer decisions, better focus. Finnish teachers often plan fewer activities. So we're not going to fill our lesson plan and our whole day with back-to-back, minute-to-minute activities, right? We're going to have 3 or 4 main stations for learning. And that's where we will create clearer, more focused intention. We'll have flexible pathways, so we'll hit on different areas of learning in our stations. And that will respond to different student needs, because as the year goes on, this should get easier for you as a teacher, because you will get to know your students. You will know the ones that want the physical learning. You will know the ones that want the artistic learning, right? So you can design those learning stations to really touch the areas that your students in this year are wanting to learn about. It might change for next year, and that's okay, because each year we want to be catering to our students' learning environments. This naturally reduces cognitive overload for both teachers and students, right? Less work, more thinking. Rushed pacing that skips understanding, right? So we don't have this list at the beginning of the year of all the pages we have to cover. That's not what this is about. This isn't about covering pages and filling in worksheet blanks. This is about digging deeper into those main ideas that we find in the textbooks. So the ideas that we want the students to think about. Teachers are less exhausted because they haven't spent so much time over preparing and then being discouraged because half the lesson didn't happen because they got bogged down in a question or an issue. The important truth is this: less planning does not mean less learning. In fact, it often means more meaningful learning, because there's time to think, to process, and truly understand. Okay, priority 3, assessment is already built in. right? So our artifacts, the things that we need to have to show the administration, to show the parents that the students are learning, comes through our assessments, right? And traditionally, we would have called those quizzes, exams, tests. But in our Finnish environment, we are going to do something different. So it's not going to be done at the end of a unit or even at the end of a lesson. In Finnish-inspired planning, assessment is woven continuous throughout every learning experience. So reflection moments. I've talked a lot about these in the last few episodes. So you guys can go back to some of those other videos and hear more about these options, these ideas for how to reflect and make thinking visible. So built-in pauses where students consider what they're learning and how they learned it. Remember, we're focusing on the process. We don't want the answer. We don't want 2 + 2 = 4. We don't want them to say 4. We want them to say how they know that it's 4. Teachers need to create listening opportunities, not only for themselves as teachers, but for their peers. Intentional time for teachers to hear students' thinking, questions, and connections, as well as their peers. Peer reflection, peer assessment. And then also evidence collection. So this is the part that we get to put in the portfolios. This is the part we can share with the parents. This is the part we can show the administration. Yes, my lesson plan is just an outline, but based on that outline, the students learn da, 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 and here are the artifacts. Here is the evidence of their learning. So assessment answers one guiding question. What does today's learning tell us about tomorrow? Number 4, student voice shapes the next lesson, right? So the next lesson is already inside the evidence that you have gathered previously in the assessment or reflection time. Instead of guessing what needs to be retaught or moving forward simply because the lesson plan says to move forward or the pacing guide is pushing you forward, teachers tune into the evidence students provide naturally during learning. This creates student accountability as well, because if the students understand the routine, teacher is going to share with us this inquiry. It's our job as students to inquire, to ask, to discover, to explore. And when we've done that, then she will ask for proof of what we learned. And if we do a good job of that, and we can truly show what we have learned, then we get to do another activity. We get to do more. Mom is happy. Dad is happy. I feel good about myself because I have learned something and was able to share it with others. So the teacher will listen carefully for repeated questions that signal shared confusion, confidence that signals that show readiness, and the patterns that emerge from student work and discussions. Ways that we can listen to student voice. I just did a mini training on the daily question routine. You guys can check that video out. I've talked a lot about exit reflections. I'm sure you all are all familiar with exit reflections, although in the Finnish way, exit reflections are a little bit different. We're not asking for the answer here. We're asking for the process, right? That's a big one. Checking in for real understanding. And then learning artifacts. These can be so many different things. Yes, it can be a piece of paper. Yes, it can be a worksheet. But when we want to make thinking visible, it requires something more. It requires hands-on, creative, critical thinking, problem-solving solutions for sharing that knowledge. And when that happens, and the teacher gathers all of this, she listens, she gathers the artifacts, she looks over and observes what they're doing while they're doing it. Also, she observes what artifacts she has received back from them, and she observes the listening, right? What she is hearing from the students. And when she puts all of that together, she already has tomorrow's lesson planned, because everything there is laid out for her. She knows where her students are struggling. She knows where they're confident. She knows where their interests lie. so she can design tomorrow's lesson to be very much on task with where her students are. Why does this matter? Why am I talking about this being so important? Can you not just stand up and lecture and have the students fill out worksheets? You can, but you're going to experience what I see many traditional teachers experience, and that is student behavior. You have kids that are distracted. They're not interested. They're wiggling. They're squirming. They're wanting to go to the bathroom. They're wanting a drink. They're not filling it out because they didn't pay attention, right? You don't have engaged learners because it's not designed for them. So we want to work at designing those lessons to meet the students' needs. So here's one idea that I have been reading about lately that is really quite surprising. But that is that there are some schools where planning is a little bit more progressive, right? So the schools are not diminished in academic standard, but they aren't requiring this busy work that some traditional schools expect from teachers. So they're more flexible. They won't require the traditional lesson plans. So how do these teachers do it, right? Basically, it's using what we've been talking about on a regular basis: observing learning, documenting their thinking, capturing their students' ideas and reasonings. You can do that with an inquiry wall. You can do it with portfolio pages. You can do it with hands-on activities. You can do it with stations, right? So you're observing and documenting. You're going to respond in real time. So adjusting the lesson based on the evidence. It's okay to do something slightly different than you had thought the students might want, because they're more curious about this other thing. And maybe as a teacher, you might feel, but no, I can't do that because I didn't do the research. I don't know. What if I don't know enough about that area? And that's the great thing about Finnish education, because in Finnish education, students get to study what's interesting to them. And the teacher, instead of being a lecturer, becomes a co-learner. And together, they discover these new paths that weren't even in the textbook, right? And they become critical thinking, problem-solving ways of learning. And then, of course, adjusting the direction, like I was talking about. This approach fundamentally challenges the traditional notion that good teaching requires detailed advanced planning of every moment. What if responsive teaching could be just as rigorous, or even more so, and provide deeper learning? So let me share with you a couple of schools that actually do this in our global educational environment already. So we have Reggio Emilia-inspired schools, where planning happens after learning through careful documentation. Teachers are observing, photographing, and recording children's exploration. Then they use this documentation to plan the next provocations and learning opportunities. The Sudbury model schools, these are areas where learning is entirely student-directed and planning emerges organically from students' curiosity and questions. Some of these schools call them labs, and the school itself has an entire classroom that is totally student-driven. So there is an adult, obviously, in the room, but the only thing that adult does is support questions for, how do I find this answer? I'm curious about this. How do I go about learning more, right? And so the adult in the room will guide the students in that way. But everything in that room is completely student-driven. It's very interesting to observe. If you want to check out YouTube videos, you might be able to find a few. We have inquiry-first environments where teachers design conditions for learning, such as the materials, the questions, and the provocations, but not rigid scripts. This path forward emerges from students' investigation and discovery, right? Inquiry-based. And then, of course, our Finnish education settings. Planning is rhythmic and responsive. Routine is vital in this area. particularly in the early childhood and basic education times. Teachers are guided by observation and professional judgment rather than prescription pacing guides, right? So our Finnish educational environments are being taught by master educators. That is the minimum education level in Finland for a teacher. So we have very qualified teachers in Finland, so we can trust them to design and be flexible and adjust the learning environment as the students come in and are challenging and curious and want to learn more. So in these models, documentation replaces prediction. Teachers document what's happening. So it's not like we're not keeping track of the learning, right? We're still keeping track, but we're doing it in a different way. We're documenting what has happened, reflecting on what it means, and using that understanding to inform what's going to come next. So let's be clear. This approach is not about removing structure. We're not getting rid of the structure. What we're doing is we're not getting rid of the structure from teaching or creating chaos in the classroom. Structure remains essential. We still need routines. We still need rhythmic learning. We still need a path, right? But that path can have many forks along the way to be effective learning. What changes is where that structure comes from. This is what's so great. So instead of imposing structure entirely in advance, which means the teacher is doing all the thinking, all the planning, and all the sorting out, much of it emerges from and responds to actual student learning, right? So the student begins to take ownership, has agency and autonomy in the classroom to guide their learning journey. So we go from predicting learning outcomes and scripting every interaction to responding to learning as it unfolds with professional expertise. Okay, so a couple of activities I'd like for you to try if you're interested. Collect one piece of evidence today. Choose something manageable, a reflection prompt, a student question from discussion, a discussion note you jotted down, or a short written response to today's learning. Sort quickly using 3 categories. Are the students ready? Students demonstrated clear understanding. What needs practice? The students who get the concept but need more application, more practice. Or still confused, students who need reteaching or a different approach. Then plan one small adjustment for tomorrow. Based on your sorting, just choose one thing. Design a warm-up that addresses the confusion, or create a small group for differentiation practice, or craft a new question for those who need it. All right. You can plan better because your students helped you. The plan emerged from evidence rather than guesswork. The other option for you to try today is to design the lesson around one question, inquiry-based learning. This activity helps you experience the clarity and power that comes from building a lesson around authentic inquiry rather than a list of activities. So choose one central question, make sure it's open-ended and doesn't have a right or wrong answer. It's just a curiosity question. Ask yourself 3 design questions. How will the students explore it? How will they talk about it? And how will they show thinking? These are the 3 questions that will help you design your stations. And then design only what supports those questions. Keep it simple and focused. One meaningful task, one structured discussion opportunity, and one reflection moment. Resist the urge to add more. If the thinking happens, the lesson worked, right? What changes for teachers? Well, teachers spend 40% of their time less planning. They spend 65% of their time with clearer decisions. They spend 80% of their time in a lighter load and 70% of their time growing confidence. Wouldn't that be amazing if our students were so confident in their learning? This approach isn't about achieving perfection in planning. It's about developing responsiveness, right? Being flexible, the professional capacity to read learning situations and adapt skillfully in the moment. So, an invitation to teach differently. If lesson planning feels heavy for you right now, please hear this. It's not because you're doing something wrong or you lack the skills as an educator. You are qualified, you've gone through school, you understand how to teach. The weight you feel likely comes from being taught to plan for control instead of curiosity, right? Traditionally, we want to control the class, keep them sitting in their chair, keep them quiet, keep them just passively listening. So we want to adjust to more of a curiosity mindset. Traditionally, you've been taught to plan for coverage. How many pages can you cover in this section instead of clarity or depth of learning? And traditionally, you're planning for prediction, right? You have to guess what the students might be interested in or how they might learn instead of being responsive or flexible in the classroom. Finnish-inspired planning offers another way forward, one that honors your professional expertise, because we all know teachers are qualified. It respects student agency, which is so different in the classroom once the students realize it. And it makes teaching more sustainable and joyful. We have less turnover. We have teachers that want to come to work. They're excited about what they're doing because the students are engaged and they're happy. This presentation is part of the Courage to Teach Differently, a micro-training series for educators rethinking learning. You are welcome to come to my website, www.reclalearningstudios.com, for lesson tools, planning resources, and self-paced online courses that support responsive, student-centered teaching practice. Thanks for joining me. I hope this gives you a great start to lesson planning the Finnish way. Feel free to drop me a comment or a question that you want me to focus on, lesson planning or otherwise, related to Finnish education, and I will be glad to support you in your educational professional journey. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe.